How did this virgin loser, yes, just like you, unlock a building system and start crafting his own empire? Let's find out together.
Two men stand in a field, staring at the vast stretch of land. One of them, holding a shovel, introduces himself as Kim Suho, though in this place he is known as Lloyd Frontera. He strikes the shovel into the ground, and a glowing blue circle spreads outward. He states that this is the story of how he, an ordinary civil engineer, completely changes the world. He calls the other man Javier, who responds by addressing him as young master. Lloyd looks at the land and claims it is all money, laughing wildly. His behavior prompts Javier to ask if he has finally lost his mind. A few years earlier, Suho receives a notification from a system. It tells him he has been chosen by the Absolute Being as a random wish candidate and will now become a character in the novel Blood and Iron's Night. When Suho wakes up in this strange new world, he recalls reading the novel the night before. He is confused by how real everything feels and wonders how this is possible, especially since he hadn't even been drinking. He starts to think he might have ended up in one of those web novel-like worlds. Suho is irritated to find himself waking up on the cold ground. Shivering, he notices his mouth feels odd and wonders why. The system mocks him, explaining it is because he slept on the street. Annoyed, Suho feels even more concerned because he has no idea which character from the novel he has become. A voice suddenly calls him young Master Lloyd, saying they have been searching for him everywhere. The voice belongs to Javier Azran, a knight from the novel. Javier suggests they return to the mansion, but Suho can't help staring. Javier looks exactly as he did in the novel's illustrations. Suho remembers from the novel that as the story progresses, Javier's reputation as a swordsman spreads across the continent. But at the start, he is just an unknown knight working for Baron Arcus Frontera. The eldest son of Baron Frontera is Lloyd, and it suddenly hits Suho. He is now in the body of Lloyd Frontera. Shocked, he mutters that Lloyd is a rascal. Javier, surprised, points out that Suho just called him by his name, not a rascal. Still, he feels relieved that Suho is aware of himself. Back at the Frontera mansion, Javier starts a fire to warm Lloyd up. He asks if Lloyd doesn't remember what happened, then without waiting for an answer, explains that Lloyd drank until he was completely drunk and destroyed the bar. Javier continues, saying that Lloyd found his way home by instinct but passed out along the way. Suho, now in Lloyd's body, figures that's just the typical behavior of a rascal. Javier mentions that the Baron was worried and sent him to find Lloyd. He says the Baron would be upset if his rascal son returned home with his mouth shut forever. Lloyd, still bothered by the cold, realizes the floor isn't heated. Javier tells him to rest and assures him he will report the bar incident to the Baron the next day. Lloyd asks if he really has to report it, and Javier simply replies, yes. As Javier heads for the door, Lloyd stops him and asks if the family has a lot of debt. Javier responds that it's nothing new or surprising, then leaves the room. Lloyd sits alone in the room, deep in thought. He knows every detail of the novel. After all, he stayed up in his cramped Goshuan last night, finishing it to the last chapter. He also knows how Lloyd's story ends, and it's not pretty. According to the plot, the Baron and Baroness fall victim to a con artist, lose everything they own, and end their lives in despair. Meanwhile, Lloyd himself spirals into a drunken mess and dies coughing up blood. Suho's voice nags at him, ranting about how pathetic Lloyd is for a noble. He's no better off than he was in Korea. Suho also wonders what this so-called absolute being is doing. Right on cue, the system kicks in, notifying him that he's been chosen as a random wish candidate by the absolute being, which leaves Suho wondering, what was his original wish that landed him in Lloyd's body? The next day, Javier reports to Manhwa Frontera, Lloyd's mother. She asks if Lloyd can apologize this time. Lloyd figures the original Lloyd should handle his own messes, but he agrees to apologize anyway, leaving both Manhwa and Javier stunned. As Lloyd and Javier head to the city, people scatter at the sight of him. One woman even yanks her child out of the way, warning him not to make eye contact. The system cheerfully informs Lloyd that the villagers despise him, but he's unfazed. It's exactly how things go in the novel. Curious, he asks Javier why he's tagging along. Javier explains that the Baron assigned him as Lloyd's guard, not so much to protect Lloyd, but to protect the townspeople from Lloyd. Lloyd briefly considers cleaning up his bad boy reputation. After all, he remembers how, in the novel, people turned every little slip-up into fuel for gossip once Lloyd hit rock bottom. But for now, he decides his priority is clearing the family's debt. Once that's handled, he plans to kick back and enjoy life as a laid-back heir until old age. Lloyd wonders if he has some kind of cheat skill to make life easier, and the system responds by listing his skills, one being an annoyance that makes everyone frown, and the other being a masterful drunken troublemaker, which only makes Lloyd more irritated as he walks past the bar. Javier quickly calls him out, asking if he lied about apologizing, and Lloyd snaps back, claiming he was just lost in thought, but Javier isn't buying it, his sharp glare cutting through the air, though he eventually brushes it off, telling Lloyd to go ahead and enter the bar. As Lloyd knocks and steps inside, Javier silently observes him, noting how different he seems, like he's a completely new person since last night, and inside, the bar tells the tale of one of Lloyd's past rampages, with broken furniture and scattered debris. Lloyd surprises everyone by apologizing to the bar owner, taking full responsibility for the chaos, but the owner freezes, clearly stunned, stammering out a timid plea for Lloyd to stop apologizing, and Lloyd quickly realizes the man is terrified because he's being too polite. Deciding to adjust his tone, Lloyd dials up a bit of his usual roughness, and it works perfectly, the bar owner visibly relaxing as he awkwardly insists there's no need for an apology, while Lloyd silently notes just how ridiculous his reputation has become. As they head back to the mansion, Lloyd casually tells Javier that he apologized to the bar owner, though the reaction wasn't exactly great, and Javier immediately points out why, explaining that Lloyd didn't just wreck the furniture but also destroyed the decorations, things the owner poured his blood and sweat into, and without proper compensation, an apology alone won't cut it. Lloyd starts to reason that his family already has a mountain of debt, wondering if they even collect taxes from the people, but he quickly realizes that none of that matters, unless he finds a way to clear the debt, though he's completely at a loss for what to do. Javier adds that the bar owner's mother is in poor health, her condition worsened by the late winter cold, and with Lloyd's violent antics on top of that, the man's stress must be through the roof. Lloyd recalls the chilly air at the bar, noting how one fireplace wasn't enough to heat the place, and it must be tough for the owner to keep up with the cold. Suddenly, an idea sparks in his mind, the kind that grows brighter and brighter and brighter until it's impossible to ignore, and he remembers the heated stone slab floors from back home and realizes the concept doesn't exist in this world, but maybe it could. Reflecting on his time in the military, when he built his own house through non-stop effort, Lloyd breaks into a grin, convinced this is his chance to tackle the family debt. He abruptly stops, declaring to Javier that they need to head back to the bar immediately because this will be the Baron family's first project. As he rushes off, the system chimes in, announcing that his real journey has begun, and with his relationship points boosted thanks to his new resolve, Lloyd realizes he can gain RP by improving his bonds with key characters. Lloyd stares at the notification, trying to figure out what it means, and when he realizes that Javier is one of the key characters, he glances at him, only for a system pop-up to show that Javier's impression of him is sitting at a brutal -30. Shocked, Lloyd decides to try and win him over, blurting out that he thinks Javier is really handsome, but Javier, unfazed, replies that he already knows, and the system cruelly informs Lloyd that his impression has now dropped to -31. Frustrated, Lloyd decides it's best to quit while he's ahead and not do anything else to annoy him. Back at the bar, Lloyd gets to work, drafting a contract that declares him the contractor, host, and operator for the building, promising to cover the cost of every item he damaged by taking on the entire construction expense. He confidently hands the contract to the bar owner, asking him to sign, but the man looks hesitant and suspicious, which only frustrates Lloyd more, as he realizes the original Lloyd's reliability is in the gutter. Deciding to lean into his scrappy reputation, Lloyd puts on a more casual air, asking the owner why he can't trust someone he sees all the time. The bluff works, and the man hurriedly signs the contract, clearly eager to avoid any further drama. Lloyd grins, telling him he made an excellent choice and won't regret it. Though Javier remains quiet, his intense gaze fixed on Lloyd, likely wondering what on earth he's plotting this time. Javier watches Lloyd quietly, observing as he surveys the area behind the bar and begins planning the construction. Breaking the silence, he asks if Lloyd is coming up with a new type of trouble, pointing out how he threatened the bar owner and made him sign a contract. Lloyd, unfazed, calls Javier more illogical than he looks and asks if he's ever heard of cognitive distortion. When Javier gives him a blank stare, Lloyd explains that it's when someone assumes that because a person did something in the past, they'll keep doing it, likening it to a mental distortion tied to prejudice and negative thinking. Lloyd de Mayer, unimpressed, corrects him, saying it's not prejudice, it's experience and estimation. Lloyd smirks, asking if those don't also stem from the past, leaving Javier momentarily speechless as he wonders when Lloyd started making sense. Lloyd shifts the conversation, vowing to make the bar owner and his mother smile no matter what. Picking up a shovel, he starts digging, reasoning that their happiness will form the foundation of his future profits. Without waiting for anyone, he throws himself into the work, building tirelessly day after day. Using timber from his family mansion's warehouse, he pieces together a basic heavy timber structure, layers the exterior with red clay, and collapses to the ground drenched in sweat, grumbling about how physically weak his body feels. Javier watches, commenting on Lloyd's speed, but Lloyd scoffs, arguing that it's taken him a full week to reach this point. Javier, surprised, admits he didn't expect Lloyd to actually honor the contract or make real progress. When Lloyd tries to get back to work despite his exhaustion, Javier picks up the axe, slicing through the wood with ease. Lloyd, impressed by how quickly Javier cuts the planks, remarks that it's no different from using modern tools, and immediately ropes him into cutting the rest of the wood and helping dig. Javier hesitates, reasoning that Lloyd should thank him instead of piling on more requests. Lloyd then says Javier is only helping out of curiosity, wanting to see if Lloyd will cause trouble. He adds that if Javier really wants to see the results, they need to finish the work as fast as possible, leaving Javier with little choice but to keep going. Javier starts to accept that he wasn't entirely wrong. Lloyd really has changed, but to figure out what he's planning, he decides to help finish the project quickly and see it through. The two dive into the work, shoveling and building together until the structure is finally complete. Javier notices a sign placed in front of the building and asks Lloyd about it. Lloyd casually replies that it's his brand logo, then leads the way inside, eager to show what he's done. Once inside, he lights a fire, and the bar owner and his mother look on in amazement. The old woman lies on the warm floor, sighing in relief as she says it feels like her stiff joints are loosening, while her son marvels at the unexpected heat. Lloyd watches their reactions, a smile creeping onto his face, reasoning that in a world without such innovations, their surprise is only natural. The bar owner, overwhelmed with gratitude, thanks Lloyd repeatedly, saying it's been far too long since his mother smiled like that. Javier, standing in the corner, recalls Lloyd's earlier claim that he'd make them smile. He starts to reflect on how Lloyd's tone and expressions have shifted, and how he worked tirelessly to keep his promise. It seems unbelievable that Lloyd genuinely wanted to make them happy, but looking at their beaming faces, Javier can't deny that he succeeded. The system suddenly pings, notifying Lloyd that Javier's impression of him has improved by 2 points, bringing it to -29, and that he's earned 36 RP from their slightly better relationship. Lloyd grins at the update and, turning to Javier, teases him by asking if he's finally stopped thinking he's trash, but Javier quickly denies it. Lloyd, unfazed, reflects on the success of his first contract. While he did spend a lot on materials like wood, he brushes it off as unimportant, reasoning that the house is just a promotional tool for his bigger plans. A few days later, villagers line up outside the building, eager to experience the heated stone slab floor for themselves. Some step out of the room, marveling at how effective and cozy it is. Meanwhile, Lloyd lounges nearby, casually asking if they'd like to have a setup like this in their own homes. He explains there are 2 options. Type A is a standalone building, while Type B is a remodel of their existing house floor. With a sly grin, he adds that signing up for both types comes with a 10% discount on the total construction cost. But instead of excitement, the villagers hesitate, their doubt clear. Lloyd quickly realizes they don't trust him. Frustrated, he leans into his usual tactics, trying to guilt and pressure them, questioning why they're so skeptical when they've seen him so often. Before he can push further, his father, Arcus Frontera, arrives unexpectedly, cutting through the commotion and demanding to know what Lloyd is up to. Back at the Frontera mansion, Lloyd and his father sit in silence, eating dinner in the quiet dining room. Lloyd keeps to himself, reasoning that he's been avoiding his father as much as possible, unsure of how to handle things if he's forbidden from continuing his construction work. After a while, Arcus finally breaks the silence, saying he wants to hear what Lloyd has to say. He asks what Lloyd is up to. Lloyd keeps it simple, figuring there's no point in over-explaining. He tells his father the bar owner wanted a heated room, so he built one. Arcus presses further, asking if Lloyd was making agreements with other people on the estate. Lloyd, realizing his father already knows everything, replies with a vague confirmation. Arcus looks at him sternly, reminding him that their family's responsibility is to care for the people, and that lying or deceiving them won't be tolerated. Lloyd sighs inwardly, thinking that no matter what he does, people will always misunderstand him. Outwardly, though, he simply reassures his father that it's not what he thinks and tells him not to worry. Standing up, Lloyd decides it's best to leave quickly. He says that since his father has nothing more to say, he'll be on his way. But before he can leave, Arcus asks if he's doing all this because of their family's situation. Without waiting for an answer, he tells Lloyd not to worry, promising he'll find a way to overcome their difficulties, and urges him to stay on the right path. Lloyd stops, staring at his father as those words stir something in him. He's heard them before, in another life, as Kim Soo-ho, when his own father used to say the same thing: don't worry, just do your best and study. Back then, Lloyd believed those words, but now he realizes it was a lie. Things hadn't been okay at all. Trying to push those thoughts aside, Lloyd tells Arcus not to give up, promising that he'll hang in there too. He leaves the room, but the weight of his memories lingers, and he reflects that he should have said those same words to his own father back then. As Lloyd steps out of the room, he assesses their current situation, noting they have 32 orders for Type A heated stone slab floors and 57 for Type B. Half of the construction payments are already in hand, which gives him some relief, though he knows the workload is stacking up fast. Meanwhile, moneylenders Meatloaf and Shallow arrive at the mansion. Lloyd watches them curiously, surprised they don't even glance his way, and wonders who they are. Inside Arcus's office, Shallow confronts the Baron, questioning how much longer he plans to stall. Meatloaf follows up, pointing out that 5 days have passed since the due date. If the delay continues, they'll be forced to take action. Shallow smugly suggests selling assets to raise funds, but they're unaware that Lloyd is eavesdropping outside the door, a sly grin forming as he thinks the timing couldn't be better. Suddenly, the system chimes in, notifying Lloyd that his RP is at 36. Reflecting on how he gained RP by improving Javier's impression of him, he starts brainstorming how to make the most of it. The system explains that RP can be used to unlock abilities, which piques his interest. After a brief sarcastic remark that earns a warning, he quickly apologizes and promises to behave. A magical circle glows beneath his feet as the system lists a range of skills like soil mechanics, hydraulics, and advanced programming. The knowledge feels oddly familiar, and Lloyd attributes it to his engineering background from his scholarship days. The system clarifies that these skills are based on his existing knowledge and require RP to activate, 15 for basic surveying and 20 for basic design. Curious, Lloyd selects basic design and feels a surge of clarity as the skill activates. Gazing out his window, he marvels at how he can now see an intricate 3D blueprint of the cityscape without needing GPS or reference tools. Testing his newfound skill, he starts drafting and modifying designs mid-air, reflecting on how much easier this is compared to his old struggles with scribbled plans. However, the thought of executing these designs brings him back to reality. Javier's help alone won't cut it for the sheer scale of construction he has in mind. He briefly entertains the wild idea of summoning heavy machinery, only for the system to interrupt, introducing the random summon game. Lloyd learns he can spend RP to summon partners with unique abilities and personalities, much like heavy machinery, but with a twist. The game sounds suspiciously like a pay-to-win feature, and Lloyd can't help but compare it to a premium mobile game ad. One turn costs 50 RP, but with only 36 RP at the moment, he's out of luck for now. Realizing that boosting relationships with key characters is his ticket to earning more RP, he concludes that making himself likable is no longer optional, it's the only way forward. Meatloaf slams his hand on the table, his voice filled with anger as he suggests Baron Arcus sell the Baroness and her ladies to a nice place if he's truly out of money, promising it would fetch a hefty sum. Arcus, seething with rage, rises from his seat, rebuking Meatloaf for his outrageous disrespect, emphasizing that even as a moneylender, he has no right to speak so insolently. Before tensions can escalate further, Lloyd steps in, placing a hand firmly on Meatloaf's shoulder. Startled, Meatloaf jumps back, demanding to know who Lloyd is. Arcus frowns, questioning why his son is getting involved. Meatloaf, with a mocking tone, sarcastically refers to Lloyd as the eldest son with peculiar manners. Lloyd waves off their remarks and coldly demands to see their warrant. Confused, Meatloaf questions his meaning, prompting Lloyd to cite the kingdom's noble law, Article 3, Clause 6. He explains that nobles, as vassals of the king, have the right to protect their interests, and that entering a noble's residence without a warrant constitutes trespassing. Shalo scoffs, dismissing Lloyd's claims and stating he's never heard of such a law, but Lloyd challenges him to check the records if he doubts it. With a calm yet commanding tone, Lloyd calls for Javier, who promptly appears, his demeanor sharp and menacing. Lloyd instructs Javier to cut off the trespasser's arms, his voice steady as if it were an everyday task. Seeing the seriousness in Javier's stance, panic sets in for Meatloaf and Shalo. Meatloaf stammers, pleading for an explanation, while Shalo warns them that this will have consequences. Realizing they've lost the upper hand, the two men hastily flee, their arrogance replaced by fear. Baron Arcus turns to Lloyd and Javier, his tone stern as he scolds them, worrying about the potential fallout from their actions, but Lloyd calmly places a bag of money on the table, explaining it's from the collected orders and should be enough to cover a significant portion of this month's interest. Arcus, still skeptical, asks if Lloyd has been taking money from their people. Before Lloyd can respond, Javier steps in, assuring Arcus that Lloyd is committed to fulfilling every order and expressing his complete trust in him. With that, Lloyd announces they'll be leaving, and he and Javier exit the room, leaving Arcus to process the surprising turn of events. As they stroll away, Javier, ever curious, asks how Lloyd knew about such a law, having always assumed him to be completely ignorant of such matters. Lloyd waves off the question casually, claiming he picked it up somewhere. Internally, though, he reflects on the truth. He learned it from Javier himself while reading the novel. After the Baron and Baroness tragically committed suicide, two vile loan sharks desecrated their graves to sell the corpses. Javier, burning with righteous fury, invoked the kingdom's noble law and summarily decapitated the offenders. Despite being put on trial for his actions, he was found not guilty due to the law's protection. Lloyd smirks, knowing this key detail from the story has now become a major advantage in his own hands. As he muses over his maneuvering, the system finally chimes in. It notifies Lloyd that Baron Arcus's approval rating has increased by 6 points, earning him a sweet 60 RP. His current RP total now sits at 61. Feeling the satisfaction of progress, Lloyd grins. Everything is falling into place, inching him closer to his ultimate goal of using the summoning system. Lloyd reaches his fields, scanning the area to ensure no one else is around. Satisfied, he commands the system to display the summon game. When he clicks the start button, a magical circle appears, small but extravagantly detailed. He blinks in surprise. Suddenly, a baby squirrel jumps out of the circle. Lloyd looks at it, unimpressed, and dismisses it as a failure. The squirrel chirps "Pee-podong," and somehow Lloyd understands it's insisting it isn't a failure and can actually be helpful. Skeptical, he jokes about it shooting acorns, but the squirrel shakes its head in protest. Lloyd, unimpressed, tells it to prove its worth. The squirrel eats something, then spits it out, leaving Lloyd grimacing. He notices 2 pieces of paper nearby and picks them up, realizing they are user manuals, where the squirrel then introduces itself as Pong, claiming it's not a squirrel but a cute hamster deserving of love. Pong explains how sunflower seeds work. A red seed makes him grow enormous for 12 hours, and a blue seed shrinks him back before the time runs out. Curious, Lloyd feeds Pong a red seed. In seconds, Pong grows to over 30 feet tall. Lloyd can only gape in astonishment. The system promptly updates him on Pong's skills: digging at level 1, packing dirt at level 2, and cheek pocket at level 1. Testing further, Lloyd gives Pong another red seed. The hamster swells to an even more massive size. To demonstrate its abilities, Pong digs furiously and spits out a giant dirt ball. Lloyd stares, amazed. This little summon just turned into his heavy equipment solution. Lloyd paces, thinking of a way to avoid suspicion about Pong's enormous size. He decides to carry around a summoning book as a cover, ready to claim he's a summoning master if anyone asks. Satisfied with his clever plan, he turns his attention to the construction project. The next morning, Lloyd gathers 30 soldiers from his father's barony. They look less than enthusiastic, but he firmly stresses the importance of safety as they begrudgingly obey. Frustration builds in Lloyd as he watches their sluggish attitudes. With the barony drowning in debt, he can't believe their laziness. He remembers his time in the army, where training was less about combat and more about digging holes and pulling weeds. To make a point, he gestures to a massive pile of clay Pong dug in just 30 minutes, explaining that it took him an entire night to move the same amount by hand. With a flourish, he declares this the start of the estate's revival and orders the soldiers to transport the clay to the construction site. Before long, Newman, one of the senior knights serving Baron Arcus, confronts Lloyd. Lloyd had anticipated this visit and isn't surprised. Newman is one of 3 knights in the barony, along with Javier and Byron. According to the novel Lloyd knows, Neumann eventually betrays the Baron by selling secrets to con artists. Lloyd already dislikes the idea of such a man holding a senior position. Neumann demands to know what's going on, accusing Lloyd of making the soldiers do his dirty work. As head of the Knights, he declares this unacceptable. Lloyd counters coolly, stating he has the Baron's permission, but Neumann, unconvinced, brings up Lloyd's past behavior and questions his motives. Lloyd brushes him off with a sarcastic jab, asking if Neumann wants to get hit. Annoyed, Neumann pictures Lloyd as a weakling who would collapse under real pressure. The tension rises when Lloyd, unfazed, tosses a handful of dirt at him. Furious, Neumann accuses him of insulting a knight's honor and privately mocks Lloyd as the son of a broke, soon-to-be ruined baron. Lloyd, smirking, grabs his shovel and points it at Neumann, challenging him to a duel. Neumann hesitates for a moment but can't back down. Glaring at Lloyd, he vows to make him regret it. Javier tells Lloyd he'll be dueling Sir Neumann in a month and asks if he's confident about winning. Lloyd stares at him in disbelief and snaps back, asking if Javier is dumb for even asking. Of course he's not confident. He bluntly explains that he's just a low-level sword expert who barely knows how to use the mana heart skill. A nobody, really, and he questions if Javier is thinking at all. Javier bristles at Lloyd's words, his anger rising. He has to stop himself from drawing his sword right then and there. He can't believe Lloyd threw dirt in Neumann's face and even challenged him to a duel. To Javier, it all feels too deliberate, as though Lloyd orchestrated the situation and even roped the Baron into it. Now Lloyd claims he's not confident. Javier is baffled. Lloyd shifts gears and asks Javier to teach him how to use a sword. Javier immediately refuses, stating his job is to observe, not train. Besides, he doesn't believe someone like Lloyd, whom he calls scum, should wield a sword. It would only put others in danger. Lloyd dismisses the insult and counters with a deal: if Javier teaches him swordsmanship, he'll cure Javier's insomnia. This catches Javier off guard. He wonders how Lloyd knows about his insomnia. Lloyd casually explains that he knows because it's in the novel. He also knows the cause. In the story, knights are ranked in 4 levels: Swordmaster, Advanced Sword Expert, Intermediate Sword Expert, and Junior Sword Expert. Javier, currently an Advanced Sword Expert, is on the brink of becoming a Swordmaster. However, his superhumanly sharp nerves, a condition called Sword Master Syndrome, keep him from sleeping. Lloyd presses him to take the deal, pointing out that his insomnia is written all over his face. Reluctantly, Javier agrees, though he remains skeptical. After all, he's tried countless remedies with no success. Later, however, we see Javier asleep in a chair. Lloyd had him recite magic techniques from a textbook on reinforced concrete, a book so dull it could put anyone to sleep. The next morning, Javier orders Lloyd to run 50 laps around the perimeter. Without hesitation or complaint, Lloyd starts running, much to Javier's surprise. As exhaustion sets in, Lloyd argues that he should be learning skills instead of just running. Javier, however, remains silent, merely watching him. Frustrated but persistent, Lloyd keeps running and throws out sarcastic comments to provoke Javier each time he passes. Suddenly, the system notifies Lloyd that his passive skill, being ugly, has leveled up to 4. Catching his breath, Lloyd reflects on the struggle. He admits this training is tough, but it's nothing compared to his life in Korea, where he worked endlessly just to scrape by. Despite the hardships back then, he had clung to hope, believing that one day things would change for the better. Through sheer determination, Lloyd trains into the night, his persistence gradually catching Javier's attention. Finally, Javier decides to teach him proper sword fighting techniques. The system notifies Lloyd of a small but significant breakthrough. His approval rating with Javier has increased by 1 point. It's still a miserable -28, but progress is progress. On the upside, Lloyd earns 18 RP for improving his relationship with a key character, bringing his total to 29. Elsewhere, Baron Arcus speaks with Neumann. The Baron expresses his disappointment in Lloyd's behavior, calling it disrespectful and lamenting how wrong he was to think Lloyd had regained his senses. Despite his misgivings, Arcus permits the duel but warns Neumann not to take it too far. The goal, after all, is simply to humble Lloyd and bring him back in line, not to cause serious harm. Neumann agrees outwardly, but his private thoughts reveal a darker plan. He envisions using the duel as an opportunity to kill Lloyd. If the Baron objects, Neumann intends to silence both the Baron and Baroness, framing it all as a tragic suicide. With this scheme in mind, Neumann grows emboldened, eager to exploit the chaos Lloyd has unknowingly stirred to further his own ambitions. 1 month later, the day of the duel arrives. Lloyd and Neumann face each other in the arena, the tension thick in the air. Lloyd's parents stand nearby, watching nervously, along with a crowd of curious onlookers. Neumann breaks the silence, his voice steady as he asks Lloyd if he's ready. Lloyd doesn't answer right away. Instead, he kicks his shovel into position with a practiced ease, radiating unexpected confidence, and says Neumann better be ready to get hit. Lloyd stands in the arena, gripping his shovel. Someone in the crowd asks in disbelief if he's really holding a shovel, and another wonders aloud if he plans to fight Sir Neumann with it. Neumann's face hardens with anger, while Javier glances at the weapon, remembering the solid iron shovel he had specifically ordered from the blacksmith. Baron Arcus hides his face in embarrassment, muttering that Lloyd must be joking, but Javier isn't so sure. Reflecting on the past month, Javier recalls Lloyd's rigorous training, early morning drills, running laps around construction sites to guide engineers, and practicing swordsmanship late into the night. That level of dedication doesn't match someone who's simply fooling around. Lloyd, in fact, looks more serious than ever. Baron Arcus declares the duel between Lloyd and Neumann officially begun. Neumann charges forward with his sword, while Lloyd braces himself with his shovel. Javier observes, puzzled by Lloyd's seemingly unimpressive stance. Neumann strikes, accusing Lloyd of toying with him. Lloyd responds by pointing out his shovel, shocking the crowd. Neumann dismisses it, convinced that luck won't favor Lloyd twice. As Neumann attacks, Lloyd counters with surprising efficiency. Javier watches in disbelief, noticing that Lloyd's movements are sharp, practical, and finely tuned for real combat, like an evolved form of swordsmanship. Neumann stares at Lloyd, stunned, while Lloyd grins smugly and wonders aloud why Neumann looks so surprised. With confidence, Lloyd explains that any Korean man would know this technique, modern bayonet training. Using the shovel, he blocks Neumann's sword and considers its advantages. Its wide blade doubles as a shield and can even cut through thick roots. Frustrated, Neumann charges again, but Lloyd avoids the attacks with ease. Lloyd reasons that his first weapon to defeat Neumann is the shovel, and the second is the basic sword techniques he learned from Javier. As Lloyd effortlessly dodges, Neumann wonders how someone like him, known as a drunkard, could have grown so strong. The system notifies Lloyd that his synchronized tool skill has reached level 1, granting him bonuses while wielding a shovel. His physical stats increase, and his RP rises thanks to his hard work and the support of key figures like Javier, the Baron, and the Baroness. With 97 RP, Lloyd unlocks the skill extension Shoveling, ready to face Neumann head-on. Neumann grows serious, realizing he has no choice but to summon his mana heart. A faint, ghostly light glows from his chest as he channels magical power. Lloyd recognizes the technique immediately and starts calculating his next move. Fully powered with mana, Neumann declares that this is the real deal. He launches a powerful attack. Watching from the sidelines, Javier notes the overwhelming gap in skill. For most people, summoning a mana heart requires at least 5 years of intense training, and since Neumann has mastered it, Javier doubts Lloyd has any chance of blocking the strike. As Neumann's sword comes down, Lloyd shocks everyone by absorbing the mana using a technique called the Azran core, something he remembers from the book. Neumann freezes mid-fight, stunned, and demands to know if Lloyd just absorbed his mana. Before Neumann can recover, Lloyd swings his shovel and smashes it into Neumann's face, breaking his teeth. Neumann looks down in confusion, wondering if that's his tooth on the ground. Lloyd doesn't stop there. He follows up with a second blow, then a third, sending Neumann crashing to the ground. The crowd is stunned into silence. Someone hesitantly asks if Master Lloyd just won, while others murmur about how bizarre the scene is. Baron Arcus steps forward, officially declaring Lloyd the winner of the duel. Lying on the ground, Neumann stares up in disbelief. He can't comprehend how he, a sword expert, lost to Lloyd. Meanwhile, Lloyd confidently acknowledges his victory, raising his shovel to deliver more punishment. Baron Arcus quickly intervenes, reminding Lloyd that the duel is over, but Lloyd, unfazed, swings his shovel again and again, ignoring the Baron's attempts to stop him, leaving the onlookers in shock. Lloyd continues his assault on Neumann, ignoring the conclusion of the duel, until 2 guards step forward and grab his arms, telling him the duel is over. Nearby, a brown-haired man approaches Javier, his expression stern as he asks if Lloyd has lost his senses. Javier watches the scene unfold, but his mind is elsewhere, lost in thought. Reluctantly, Lloyd relents and tells the guards to let go. The guards release him, but Lloyd suddenly lunges toward Newman again. The guards restrain him once more, ordering him to stop. Javier watches carefully, noting how Lloyd seems to be targeting precise areas of Newman's body, his movements designed to maximize pain. His calm expression suggests he has planned every step of this moment in advance, as if he had foreseen it all. The scene shifts to 15 days earlier. Lloyd is resting his arm on the hilt of a sword, looking at Javier. He casually asks if Javier will teach him the Azran core technique. Javier is stunned by the request, his disbelief evident. Lloyd notices his expression and points out that he isn't asking for something bad, like teaching him to steal. Javier freezes at the mention of the technique, and Lloyd presses on, noting that it draws mana from the surroundings, not just from within the individual. Javier is caught off guard, his mind racing as he wonders how Lloyd could possibly know about it. He asks how Lloyd learned of the technique, explaining that he hasn't shared it with anyone, and that it's not even finished yet. Lloyd smirks, responding casually that Javier talks about it in his sleep. He adds, with a hint of amusement, that every time he puts Javier to bed with a lullaby, he mumbles about it. Javier narrows his eyes, his skepticism clear, but Lloyd's face is not showing any expression, and he admits that there is no way he would know otherwise. Javier apologizes, saying he cannot teach him as the technique is still incomplete. Lloyd then asks that if Javier would teach him, if he helps complete it, but Javier does not believe that it is possible. Lloyd thrusts his sword into the ground and explains that the idea is to absorb external mana and merge it with the mana heart. He demonstrates by pressing his fist into his palm, saying that the mana heart sees the external mana as foreign and rejects it. He states that they don't mix the mana, but instead condense the external mana near the heart, keeping it separate while working alongside it, much like an auxiliary engine. Javier is astonished, and he asks how Lloyd knows this. Lloyd casually responds that he guessed it. Javier mutters, still baffled, asking if Lloyd truly just guessed. Lloyd dismisses the reaction, saying it doesn't matter since it works. He then demonstrates the technique, succeeding on his first attempt and achieving 3 circles of mastery. Javier is left stunned, realizing it had taken him years of trial and error to reach this point. The system window notifies Lloyd of a 5 approval rating from Javier, which Lloyd dismisses as unimportant. He then says that he doesn't need all the mana heart details, he just wants to learn how to absorb external mana. Back in the present, Lloyd raises his shovel again to strike Newman. Baron Arcus shouts at him to stop, and Lloyd lowers the shovel slightly. Turning toward Arcus, he tells him to look under the tablecloth and judge if Sir Noin deserves the honor he's defending. Arcus hesitates but eventually removes the tablecloth, revealing stacks of sealed letters underneath. He picks one up and begins reading, his expression darkening with each word. Lloyd crosses his arms and calmly explains that the letters are between Sir Newman and Tords, the man who swindled Arcus in the real estate deal. He adds that the letters detail Arcus's financial situation, plans to forge documents, and other things Arcus would want to know. Noin's face fills with panic as he reasons that the letters were hidden in the wall. Lloyd inwardly smirks, knowing that Javier was supposed to find them later, but he spent the night searching for them himself. Arcus collapses into his chair, stunned by the evidence. Lloyd watches him closely, reflecting that, as described in the book, Arcus is truly a kind person, but kindness doesn't make for a good leader. Lloyd offers a suggestion on how to deal with Newman, and Arcus, still shaken, asks what it is. Lloyd then proposes that Arcus drop a vicious mouse on Newman's head. If it hurts him, Hay should exile him, but if not, he should be demoted him to a foot soldier and let him repent. The crowd murmurs in confusion. Some wonder why a mouse, while others argue that Sir Newman would never be hurt by a mouse. Arcus considers the proposal, and he admits that it's unconventional but fair, as it would also send a strong warning to others. Satisfied, Lloyd turns to Newman, asking if he has any objections. Newman, trembling, bows his head and says that he has none, thanking Lloyd for his mercy. Lloyd scoffs inwardly at the idea of mercy, thinking that it never changes people, it only makes them more cunning. Lloyd feeds an almond to Pong, his small creature. To everyone's shock, Pong transforms into a massive, monstrous mouse and leaps toward Newman, who screams in terror. The giant mouse lands on Newman, and Lloyd sighs dramatically, stating that Newman got hurt and should be exiled. Baron Arcus nods solemnly, declaring that Sir Newman is hereby exiled from the land. Lloyd watches Newman being dragged away, muttering to himself that the rotten man of the estate has been dealt with. Pong runs down the road, brimming with excitement, while Davier watches, confused about what Pong is up to, and Lloyd casually explains that Pong is carving out a road. Lloyd observes that the once frail soldiers now resemble seasoned construction workers, a clear sign that the real work is about to begin. Thinking about the legendary Roman roads, Lloyd admires their durability and craftsmanship, announcing his ambitious plan to build a road connecting his lordship's manor to the base of the eastern mountain. Javier, skeptical, questions the need for such a massive project, but Lloyd confidently tells him to wait and see, claiming it will put their land on the map. Javier then asks how Lloyd came to possess such knowledge, pointing out his recent accomplishments, like designing an innovative heating system and summoning a high-level creature, and he bluntly asks if Lloyd is truly their young master. The system immediately alerts Lloyd that Javier is growing suspicious of his identity. Lloyd remembers from the novel that if Javier ever discovered the truth about him, he wouldn't hesitate to strike him down, but Lloyd remains confident, knowing his special skill is made for moments like these. He boldly claims that he studied in secret and sarcastically asks if that's forbidden, to which Javier scoffs, remarking that all Lloyd ever does when unwatched is drink. Lloyd counters by asking if Javier is observing him 24/7, even while he's sleeping or in the bathroom. The tension rises as Javier presses him further, pointing out that even seasoned mages would struggle with summoning magic, but Lloyd turns the tables, questioning how Javier mastered mana at such a young age. As their argument heats up, Lloyd abruptly declares that if there's nothing else, he has important business to handle. The system notifies him that his skill, stubborn insistence paired with swift topic changes, has been effective. He entrusts Baron with overseeing the road construction in his absence, and Baron agrees, wishing him a safe journey. Javier insists on joining him as his bodyguard, a role Lloyd dismisses as obvious but permits nonetheless. When Javier asks where they're headed, Lloyd reveals they are going to reclaim stolen money. In the small border town of Rudnaya, a conman named Thords sits in frustration after losing a fortune. His bodyguard, unfazed, dismisses it as the nature of gambling but warns he'll leave if Thords can't pay him. Thords reassures him, vowing to come up with the money somehow, and orders him to stay hidden, fearing their enemies might be searching for them. Suddenly, Lloyd kicks the door open, cutting off their conversation. Thords looks at him in confusion, asking who he is, but Lloyd introduces himself as Lloyd Fenra, leaving Thords in shock. Thords' bodyguard offers to kill Lloyd, but Thords suggests they should run instead. Without hesitation, the bodyguard grabs Thords and leaps out of the window. Outside, Javier is already waiting with his sword drawn. He warns Thords to surrender and accuses the bodyguard of being a co-conspirator if he resists. Unfazed, the bodyguard mocks Javier's youth and confidence, summoning dark magic in response. From the broken window, Lloyd watches the scene unfold, recalling from the novel that this marks Javier's first encounter with a dark enchanter. The bodyguard uses gravitational magic, making it hard for Javier to stay balanced. However, Javier counters with his mana heart ability, now enhanced to a triple circle level, far stronger than the novel depicted. With ease, he launches a counterattack and comments on the peculiar weight-shifting magic the bodyguard used. Realizing he is outmatched, the bodyguard dissolves their contract with Thords and flees. Thords panics, but Javier shows no mercy. He scolds Thords for the audacity of deceiving a noble family and threatens to cripple him. Just as the situation reaches a boiling point, Lloyd intervenes, stopping Javier. He warns that taking Thords to court could backfire, as Javier's harsh actions might cost him his head. Reluctantly, Javier complies but remains puzzled, wondering why Lloyd would show mercy to someone like Thords.